All right. Okay. So Janice, thanks for coming in the hot seat. Tell me what we're working on today, because you will probably have roughly about 5 minutes for you. I'll get 5 minutes, maybe a little longer, to give you feedback. Give me a little context about what it is that you're wanting me to work on with you today.
Okay. This is an emotional story.
Yeah.
Emotional for me, and you'll see in the story how I had a realization about a mindset that many people have that I learned from and that I overcame by some methodology.
Yeah.
And so I want to clean up the story.
Nice. Would it ever be the first story you put in your speech, or is it buried somewhere?
It doesn't matter. And I've tried it in different ways, because I actually did a speech at Patricia Fripp's Breakfast Club recently. And I did the story towards the end, and it was getting people inspired to be fit. And so I said I wasn't always so fit. Let me tell you a story of how I got there, how I got from sedentary to fit. And I told this story. And one of my friends said it was too much of a downer after I had people up dancing Zumba. So now I've changed things and I put the story earlier. So I'm mixed on where it would go.
Well, I'll take a look at it as you're telling it and kind of decide, maybe we can talk about where to put it. It does make a difference if it's first, because in the beginning of your keynote, so much needs to happen. And it's
Right.
Your first meeting with them after your intro that I'm always looking at. If it's first, there's a lot more on the line. So I will know when you're through whether I might say, don't ever put it first, or that's how you should open. Now I know you're not going to, it's a hot seat, so we're kind of casual here. So you're not going to perform it. You're just going to read it, right? You got it written down. So we're going to, or both.
I mean, I've delivered this story a few times, so it's basically memorized, but I have it up here, the script up here, because just in case I forget something, or because I've made minor changes today.
Okay. And one thing I'll do too is I know that this is not your ideal setting. So right. I'm not going to go, well, don't deliver it like that. Well, of course you wouldn't. You're reading it, or you're sitting, you're sitting down.
Right.
However, there will be times when I may think, so I'm going to understand as I'm listening that this isn't your natural setting for delivery, but I will be watching for things, because delivery is half of it, where I'll say, okay, now when you do it, just be sure that this is the way it's delivered, and it'll give it even more power. All right. We good there? So, okay. Anytime you want to start, you just go ahead and, whatever. I'm ready when you are.
So first of all, I have the script off to the left, and so my eyes are going to be shooting to the left. Should I put it above?
No, I think it matters. In fact, you might be more comfortable if you're not looking at me. I can still get the experience.
Okay, yeah.
The script. That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could even pretend that the audience is where your script is, and I can adjust.
Okay, great.
Okay.
It was a typical East Coast wedding. In this case, this was the daughter of my first cousin, so it would also be a family reunion. And in typical East Coast fashion, it was a lavish affair at an extravagant hotel with gourmet food and a 7-piece band. So we had eaten, we had drunk, we had danced, and we were feeling merry. My mother and I were taking a little rest break, sitting having a little sip of water. Across the room, I see my brother's wife talking to my cousin's wife. Looked like friendly party chatter. But I'll never forget my mother's words. Wonder what they're talking about with their heads huddled together. There was no reason to be angry, envious, jealous, or to feel left out. And in that moment, a huge balloon of awareness popped open over my head and rained down upon me like raindrops in a spring rain. I had inherited my mother's feelings of rejection. It was like watching characters on a stage. And I, in that moment, saw the mental play I had been acting out for myself for years. Now, how did I develop these feelings of rejection? In order to answer that question, I have to take you back to my early childhood. So here at this point, I go into the early childhood. What a great family we had. We were from Texas. We had barbecues every Sunday. My father spent so much time with us. Then we got a little older and they began to have unreasonable expectations of perfection, constantly being criticized, developing low self-esteem. Then middle school, they wanted us to be in the perfect social set. There's more feelings of rejection. Then I became a dancer in my 20s, quit the dream job of being a computer programmer to go be a dancer in Reno, Nevada, got my first gig, was criticized for being 5 pounds overweight. 5 pounds was too fat. And the producer called me aside and said, we're going to fire you if you don't lose the 5 pounds. I did lose the 5 pounds. But meanwhile, I felt horrible with the situation. Then I bring it all together and talk about the serenity prayer and how I had to learn to take control of my emotions for myself and not become an overeater. So at this point, if I'm talking about overweight or any addiction, I talk a lot about how we use food or an addiction to assuage our feelings, how that might last for the moment, but how that doesn't really let your true self out. And then I talk about how we have tools for overcoming addiction. And what matters is how we think of ourselves.
Got it. Okay. Hold on. Let me write yourself a note. Tools, how we think. So kind of where you're going at that point is into the application for your audience, right?
Right.
And the content. Okay. This is good stuff.
It could be mental health. It could also be mental health in the workplace, which is a whole nother ball of worms, but it's related, and how people come to work with all sides of crappy baggage, and it can spill over into the workplace. Okay.
Now, I'm going to give you quick feedback fast, and we're recording this so you can have the recording or watch it on YouTube. So I'm going to throw a lot at you at once, and then you can go back and unpack it later. It's a great story. It's a great story idea. I think it is a perfect thing to open up with, because it sets up the struggle you've had with this your whole life, and that you're going to help the audience get out of that. So it doesn't make sense to me to put it near the end. It makes more sense that it's open near the beginning. It lets us get to know you. It breaks any sense of you being the speaker up here we don't feel like we can relate to. When you tell me this stuff, suddenly you're a real person with real issues, just like I am. So I love this kind of a story. There are great opportunities for humor and even more, and which we're going to talk about. There are places that we're going to talk about that we need to flesh out when you go back to your early childhood. The things I want to talk to today have to do with structure.
Okay.
And that's the having a clear structure of the story will help you tell it better. And so let me give you this quick formula, because your homework will be to go answer these questions to this equation I'm going to give you, and then go kind of write the story again, but with that as the foundation. Okay. And I'll go through it real fast, and then I'll go through some of the detailed feedback I have on the story. Every story has a character, which obviously is you, with a conflict.
Right.
And that's not really clear. We're working on one story here. And so to me, I want it really clear to you in this story what the conflict is. What's the struggle or the problem that you've dealt with in your life? It's coming out in pieces, but I want you to do this structure formula. It's kind of like before you would have written this, I would have asked you to do this first. So this is you with this conflict and this problem plus an emotion. Don't just tell me what the struggle or struggles you've had. Tell me how it made you feel. That's when we connect. We don't have to have had the same mother, the same experience, the same struggle. But when you define the emotion, now we start to connect. And the story is what really starts to get people in their brain to connect emotionally with what you're trying to teach. So your story's doing it. You're really opening the door for this this emotional footprint you need to go teach them, like we said earlier, the how-tos. So your character plus conflict plus emotion plus a resolution. At what point was this solved? It might have been through one person. It might have been through a series of steps. It might have been over years. I mean, and this is not an easy question to answer, but in this case of this story structure, we need an answer. It's kind of like when I talked about being the picked on kid growing up and realized where was the catalyst that pulled me out of that? Where was the resolution? Then there's an emotion attached to that. How did it feel? I'm always telling you to include emotion. Then there is a victory moment. There is a moment in your story where now you aren't that bitter person anymore, or you aren't that. You're living into that new moment where you're living out this new truth, and there's an emotion attached to that. So how that made you feel. Plus a lesson, plus an action step.
Oh,
Now and you've already got that, so you're not going to have any trouble with that because you already know what the lesson of the story. Well, you might need a little crafting in the lesson. A lot of times people think they know what the story is, but then when I ask them to fill out the lesson, they're like, whoa, it'll, and then the action step for the listener. If you force yourself to put every story through that model first, it will serve you well in really determining who the character is with this conflict. And there's a before and an after. Now let me go into your story that you told me, because I want to make sure I try to do this in 5 minutes, no more than 10. But you go back and what I just gave you is going to feel clunky and weird.
yeah.
You just have to work through it, and it takes a process. And sometimes you'll have a story that's not about you, and that character doesn't have a conflict. But it's because you learned something from that person watching them, and you have a conflict that's fixed. And that's how you work that out. You have, I don't know how much humor works into your presentations, but humor is gold. Laughs are currency. They're gold, especially in a keynote, but in training, the more laughs you get, the more you can make. And the more people love it, you know that. So you have a huge opportunity for humor in describing an East Coast wedding and a family reunion. So I want you to farm that. We can't really go deep into that today, but you're leaving a ton on the table in what it's like when your family gets together for an East Coast wedding and a family reunion. Picture, if you need to get triggered for creativity, watch My Big Fat Greek Wedding and pull out the things. You're going to describe the characters and what people are wearing and how they're dressed and how they act and what you do at your weddings and what's tacky and what's not. You have so much opportunity for humor here in this. You don't need to turn it into 10 minutes of humor. However, if this story becomes longer because of it, nobody will blame you. I like most stories to come in about 10 minutes, but if it's longer because it's hysterical, those laughs are worth it. So explore, maybe get with a friend and go back and forth around, let's explore weddings, family reunions, the funny, exaggerated things people do, the way they act and the way they talk and the way they dress and the nicknames that they have and who's trying to outdo each other and Jersey weddings compared to Southern weddings. There's so much meat there. So then you're sitting next. I love, you said we were feeling merry. I crossed out Mary and wrote, we were feeling no pain.
Yes.
Just a funny little line to just say, we were feeling, let's just put it this way, we were feeling no pain. So my mother sat down, show me any details you can, Janice. Take me in the story, let me see it. You don't have to give me a ton of them, but say that you kicked off your high-heeled shoes, and you sat down in a white wooden chair with a net flower on the back, whatever. Give me something to see, and it'll make the story more entertaining. So then you're I'm in it more, I can see it. So now you're sitting with your mother, and we are, as many women in our family do, checking it, making sure everybody's acting appropriately, or however you want to make that funny little comment. And then you could say, and suddenly my mother, that two people are talking. When you said brothers, cousins, be careful about brother's wife to cousin's wife. My brain takes too many roads. What? My brother's wife's cousin's mother. Make it simpler. Give us the least path. We're sitting there and we can see two women talking across the way, or two of my cousins.
It's important that they're relatives. So
yes,
two cousins. Two cousins.
But say two cousins, because it's not even important. Well, it doesn't matter, but give me a shorter path because I'm still trying to work out in my brain. Okay, the mothers, just say two cousins. And then my mother sets in. My mother starts doing what my mother does best. And without disrespecting your mother, but in some way build the drama up. Have her keep going for 10 minutes. She went on about why is she going to wear that color skirt? Make it something trivial she's talking about. Why?
For sure she would do that.
Who wears purple in September? I mean, my mother once talked forever about how many tomatoes somebody put on their salad bar at the Applebee's salad bar. So more humor.
They were white after September 1st, whatever it was.
Yes. So give me some specifics and raise the stakes, as Bill Staten would say. Raise the stakes on the story. Make it more dramatic. So that's one way to add more. And let me go. Now, when you go into your early childhood, you scanned through a lot of bullet points.
I wasn't, because I was afraid I was going to go over time.
Oh, got it.
So I was just summarizing for you what I talk about. I talk about being from the South.
Oh, got it.
My father was a meat packer.
Well,
blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so from a structural perspective, I want to make sure that in that moment, you're going to some poignant moment you had in your childhood where you felt rejected. You don't have to go to a lot of them. You can go to
I have 3 act outs. I do.
Okay, then I won't.
You bought an orange dress. Orange is not your color. You made all A's last semester. Why didn't you make all A's this semester?
Okay, then you've got that under control. I just didn't hear it, so I was like, wait. Now, one thing I didn't understand, and maybe it'll work out in the language of the story, or you just were trying to get it through fast, is I did not understand how your mother talking about somebody and suddenly we're jumping into how you felt rejected as a child. You said you had an awareness and it rained. I'm not sure I like the rain down on you like raindrops. I couldn't picture that image. And it felt too poetic, that not conversational. So I couldn't really know what that felt like. But I needed to know why that suddenly connected to you feeling rejected. So you might have just rushed it, but it wasn't a clean connection to me. Your mom's talking about people. Now, how do we go to, what was the awareness you had? And that's something you may have to think about. What awareness did you have? Oh my gosh, suddenly I see the impact my mother had on me my whole life. Or how does it relate to your mother?
Well, it was exactly what I said. And this is a very true story. In that moment, because I had moved away from home for so many years. I hadn't been around her venom that much. But when she started being critical of them, I realized that I was acting towards myself the same way she had been acting towards herself.
Okay, bingo. It still could even be explained a little bit more. If we had more time, I'd say, what? Say that again. But you didn't say that the first time. So that is exactly what I need in that moment. Is I need that aha when you're looking at her. See, you said this awareness, and then you said, I've always been rejected. And I went, what? Follow through what you just said to me, a little bit more. As I'm looking at her, I'm realizing, and you could even say, because I'd been away from it a while, I had a little bit more clarity. Oh, wow. What she's doing right now is what I've been doing to myself. And then you can go to early childhood. So that was the main thing structurally, is that I wasn't making the connection between this scene and where you were going next. I know you know it in your head. It just didn't come out, and maybe you would say it in a different way later, but in this moment, I didn't make the connection. Or even that you're over it. I mean, some people would be looking at what their mother's saying, Janice, and they're still in that place. And now they're having that moment of, you see what I'm saying? I mean, are you fine now? And it's been interesting to know where you are, because maybe the story could go back to that wedding, somehow wrap it up that in that moment, you almost feel sorry, for the, because now you're not doing it. You're in a better place.
So this ties into the lesson is, where does self-doubt come from, and why are many people plagued with self-doubt in their careers or whatever?
And you could even, if that's where the lesson's going, you could go back to that moment and that awareness. It could be, my mother spent a lot of time in that moment. I really saw how much time my mother spent, and had been most of her life, judging other people, which in truth is really something deeper.
It's really judging yourself.
It's really judging yourself.
Yeah.
And I realized, so then you can connect it to, and you could say, and I know what that feels like, because I had been judged and judging myself my whole life. And then you go into your life. It's just they're just structural little bridges into how to connect this in a way. And I do think, and I'll end on this note, I do think that if before you write that story on paper, you go to that formula and you write out the character, the conflict, the resolution. I've had stories that I've put back through that formula. They were good enough as they were, but then when I put it through it, it made them even better. It made them more powerful, and it really helped you figure out the structure of that conflict to resolution moment. So there you go.